Good morning, everyone. Wow, wasn't that a great opening panel? Really enjoyed hearing all those perspectives. And I guess this next panel is all about creating your 2025 accessibility strategy. And I think reflecting on the last panel, what we're really looking to do by planning is to move away from the random acts of diversity that Paul mentioned. And, you know, keeping in mind what Jennison said about progress, not perfection, having a relatively pragmatic approach to what's needed, but it really is all about change management, as Romana was saying. So, and when we were preparing this panel, we said we were talking about strategies, and I think there's been an awful lot of strategies written in the world that have never been enacted or have not actually come to fruition. So, you know, what we really wanted to zone in on today is what makes a strategy work for you. How does that come about? So yeah, I've got a fantastic panel here to reveal those secrets. And I'm going to start with you first, Jared. So if you could introduce yourself and explain what you do at HSBC. And then my question really is there a magic formula to writing and a strategy? And if there is, you know, what are the key ingredients that have been successful for you?
Yeah. Well, hello, everybody. Good to see you all. My name is Jared Clayton. I'm one of the digital accessibility leads here at HSBC. To the question, then, is there a magic formula? I wish. I wish there was, honestly. The reality is no. I think, you know, with each of our organisations that are in the building, outside the building, you know, we've all got different organisational strategies, so accessibility is of course no different. And I think there's many reasons for that. You know, obviously the different sizes of companies, the different cultures, you know, the different stakeholders that we all work with. So naturally, you know, there isn't a single strategy that we can all adopt. However, I think there is almost ingredients that can be kind of put together to develop a strong strategy. So again, I don't think there's a single recipe, but I think there are these kind of fundamentals that we can all start to think about. So I've got about 3 or 4 things that I'd like to kind of talk about. And the first one is around kind of vision, kind of understanding your destination and the goals in which you want to kind of reach. And of course, at HSBC, you've probably heard it a lot by now, but we want to be the world's most digitally accessible bank. We want to be the bank of choice for disabled, neurodiverse and elderly customers, but also, and I think one of the most important things is being also the employer of choice for that same group of people. So I think, you know, we talked, I think, yesterday with JC, and he was on the stage talking about, you know, 3 years ago, we kind of had the lid up, or so to speak, on our kind of brand. And then there was like this opportunity really of kind of getting accessibility in there and having that kind of manifest across the organisation. And I think that in and of itself has been one of the things at HSBC that has really kind of propelled the programme forward. And it's something that when I'm speaking to colleagues internally at HSBC, it's something that we almost feel like we all recognise, and it's something that we all are trying to drive towards. And Marley says it quite rightly, you know, we do have an entire organisation of 220,000+ colleagues that are behind us trying to do this. And it's all because it is ingrained within the organisation through its brand. So I think, you know, having that as a fundamental, now it may not be a part of your brand in your organisation, but I think trying to find something that allows you to disseminate accessibility through an organisation is a really strong way to start your strategy. I think the second point I'd like to touch on is around capability. And we've talked a little bit around this, around making sure that we've got the right skills in the room. And of course, you know, we've talked about our Training 1000 programme and our accessibility hub. And this is all really trying to kind of get into those teams that are really delivering on change. So whether it's our developers, our designers, our content authors, our QA guys, and really kind of bringing them up to be able to speak the same language as the accessibility professionals that are supporting them. And again, I've had the privilege of working with some fantastic digital teams within HSBC and how they kind of use this knowledge that we've, you know, initially gave to our colleagues to begin with. And we have to remember that this kind of training that we're now putting out there to other organizations was initially for our own staff. And we kind of saw that working. And that's where we almost felt like, okay, well, you know, why keep it to ourselves? You know, why not, if we give it to everybody, realize how that can then kind of raise the ceiling and the floor for everybody. So I think capability is really important, and I think one that has to be a part of any key strategy. I think thirdly, and I'm going to be a little bit biased here because I'm one of the leads for our staff-facing program, but focusing on your staff, I think is a really key thing. And it's probably one that not many organizations are really focusing in on properly. Of course, we have, adjustments and having to provide assistive technologies, etc. But there was a realization moment for me a few years ago where I was leading assistive technology in another organization. And, it was part of my responsibility to kind of give technology to our staff, whether it was a screen reader or, training and things like that. And what I was realizing, just kind of giving kit to people wasn't working. It really, really wasn't working. And, having colleagues telling me that, it's great that you're giving me all this really helpful knowledge around how to use JAWS, for example, which is a screen reader. But it doesn't work with our payslip system. It doesn't work with our intranet and, so on and so forth. And that was kind of the light bulb moment for me in terms of the problem isn't necessarily the technology. It's around how we're building things and the environment that we're building for disabled and neurodiverse individuals. So that's where I started to lean my attention to focusing on platform and product teams and supporting them in developing products and services that ultimately work for everybody. So if we can foster a culture internally whereby we are creating accessible products and services for our colleagues, they are automatically going to become advocates. We're going to be able to hire a more diverse workforce. And I've seen it within HSBC of the culture that then creates and how that then kind of enables teams to then kind of want to build because they've got, people within their teams with disabilities ultimately. So that's kind of a third thing. And then the last thing, before I talk for too long, is around leadership. And I think Jennison kind of talked about it, of this kind of skill set. And, we're all fantastic advocates, I think, in the digital accessibility space. And we all know the business case and, we're kind of, trying to get buy-in, etc. But I almost feel like this skill of leadership is something that's perhaps sometimes misunderstood. And obviously we've got fantastic people like JC and Ian Stewart, coming in and backing accessibility. And we've, of course, got Marley as well, kind of championing it across events like this and more broadly. But I think being able to kind of speak to the different stakeholders within the organization, I think being quite vulnerable and being quite open and honest and almost taking sometimes no for an answer is the kind of that type of skill that needs to be developed in organizations, because it's a difficult space, accessibility. It is very hard, as we all know, to be able to kind of get to the top of the organization and make that kind of commitment. But I think, if you aren't the leader yourself, I think seek out that leader within your organization that's going to help you be able to kind of unlock those doors. So I think leadership is a key one. And of course, there are many other ingredients, of course, around, things like process, which was talked about, around procurement, around tooling, and the list goes on. But I think there are 3 or 4 things that I've been reflecting on that I think have really kind of made a change here at HSBC.
Some pretty powerful ingredients in there, I think. I think someone else has been speaking about several other people have been speaking about the importance of putting colleagues first, actually, because how can you ask an organisation to believe in a strategy that only prioritises the needs of disabled customers or clearly considers colleagues to be poor relations in that? And so I think that's a really important point. Thanks, Jared.
Thank you.
So, Matthew... So we've said that there isn't a magic bullet, but are there some key characteristics that you need to align people around to make your strategy actually work harder for you?
Hi, everybody. I'm Matthew Luken. I'm a strategic consultant at Deque, and our job is to help companies understand where they are and mature rapidly. So the first one that we think about is definitions and understanding, because those are 2 widely different things. And simple example of that is like conformance. Does everybody have the same definition of what conformance means? Or severity, right? How do you scale different defects? But understanding is the harder part. So when you think about, again, conformance, does everybody define it the same way? And so a lot of times we'll go into companies and interview various people across the spectrum in the business, and we'll ask them to define conformance, and we get widely different answers. And some might say, it's the true WCAG definition with no defects, no problems. And others maybe define it by their internal standard, which could be completely different. And so they're working really, really hard. They think they're working on the same thing, but they actually have different end goals. So definitions and understanding. RACI, so roles and responsibilities. Is there standard handoffs like you would in any other operation? Again, we go into companies and we say, okay, who's doing X, Y, and Z? And they're like, oh, that team over there. And we'll go ask that team, and they'll be like, oh, well, it's actually that team over there, the one that we just left. And it's like, okay, can we get you both in the same room to realize that you both think the other's doing it, in reality, nobody's doing it. Then going into, do you have the plan, right? So you have the plan that Jared's talking about. You have a mission. How far out is it? Is it just a couple months? Is it 6 months? Is it a year? Is it 3 years? And then does everybody have the same understanding about that? And by that, I mean, what is the definition of success to move from one gate to the next gate? Can we say that this task is complete? Can we move on to the next task? Because that's how you're going to mature. And if nobody is on the same page about that, somebody could think that they've done their part, but in reality, it's not really finished yet. So having a common understanding about what those things look like so you can move forward. But also, what does it look like if you need to adjust? What are the triggers that say, hey, we're not going down the right path? How do we adjust, and when do we adjust, and what does that look like? And tying it back to RACI, who do we need to get together to make a new definition? Or what is the plan to adjust? Or if one person or group is moving faster than another, what does that look like, and how do we deal with that? And so we use the very simple analogy for people is if you're sailing across the lake. You're in the boat, you all get together, you all know you're going to go to the other side of the shore. Is that good enough to get in the boat and get moving? And is everybody comfortable knowing that you can adjust as you go along? But what does it take to adjust? Who's calling out that we're going to take a different tack and go into the wind? Or do we have a common understanding of what the other side of the lake looks like? Does it mean that rock over there, or just in generality? So those key things, and getting everybody talking the same way, understanding it the same way. And a simple technique is just have people vocalize it. Can you tell me what you think conformance looks like? And if you see that there's a misunderstanding, correct the misunderstanding.
That's really, I love the analogy of the lake, actually, because, how frustrating if a bunch of people are all ready and packed up and ready to go, and someone else is still like hitting the snooze button, that's not going to help anyone, is it? But also agility in strategies. It's important to pursue a strategy, but you do have to be able to question it, tweak it, react to what comes at you 100%. Love it. Okay, so Heather, when we were preparing for this session, we were talking about where should a strategy live, and should you have a standalone accessibility strategy, or should it be a subsection of every strategy in the organisation? And again, I think we arrived at it depends on the organisation, and I guess on the one hand, you've got the challenge that Paul described earlier, which is, it's okay, we've got an accessibility team and an accessibility strategy. They'll just tick that off and we can all carry on as we are. So, and we were talking about standalone strategies, and that's what you've got there at Skyscanner. So how have you been able to make that live throughout the organisation?
Okay. It's a good question. Hi, everyone. I'm Heather Hepburn. I am the head of accessibility at Skyscanner, and also one of the co-founders of CAN, or the Champions of Accessibility Network. And I see loads of members actually when I'm sitting up here. Hi. Great to see you. It's a network that we hook up on LinkedIn. So if anyone is not a member, please find us. It's called CAN, and it's a community for all of us. So you're all welcome. When I joined Skyscanner about 5-6 years ago, there was no accessibility strategy, and I would bet quite a lot of money that the word accessibility was not even present in any of the existing strategies across the business. So my job there when I started was to create the first strategy around accessibility. And from the beginning, there were 3 main pillars. So as Jared was talking a lot about, the first one was about our people. So how do we change our workplaces, our processes, everything to make it easier for our disabled colleagues? The second one was about our travellers. So they're our customers. How do we make our websites and apps available to everyone to use? And then the third pillar was our industry. How can we influence the travel industry, which we all know is very much lacking in accessibility? How can we use our influence to try to improve that? Thankfully, our DE&I team have done a lot of work over the last couple of years to look more into the internal people side of things. So that part has now come out of my strategy as living now where it, I think, should. So I can now focus more on our products and our industry. But yes, the standalone strategy is one that we have. I still don't think that accessibility is mentioned enough or maybe anywhere in the other digital strategies across the business. But we obviously have to work a lot with all of the other teams in the business. So to do things like, as part of our strategy, things like implementing new testing tooling or trying to get accessibility training as part of a mandated set of training outcomes, or trying to improve our accessibility annotations that designers use. Thank you to eBay, we're starting to use Include, which is great. That's all there, and that needs collaboration with other teams. So something that we have been doing over the last few years, and I think quite successfully, to do that well, there's 3 things really. The first one is building relationships. So we have to work with teams right across the business. We have to talk to them. We have to understand what they're doing, what their priorities are, how we can work with them. And we now have some great relationships across pretty much the whole of Skyscanner, which is amazing. The second thing is understanding how they do things. So we don't want to come along with like this completely new process and dump it on an engineering team and say, do this now, please, we need it to happen. We want to understand what they're already doing so that we can try to embed what we're doing in alongside that. It's just going to be so much easier for everyone. And the third thing I think is we're very lucky to have a very strong champions network at Skyscanner. So we do have champions across all of the teams that we're trying to work with. And that's fantastic because they are our allies. They are the ones that we can reach out to first. They're the ones who understand and who care. And just to give one example of how something that we've done leads back to those 3 points. All of our engineering teams have something called a definition of done, which many of you will know that term, but it's a checklist that they check off at the end of a project before they push their code to production. Now, Skyscanner is wonderfully autonomous, so every single squad has its own completely different definition of done. Of course it does. And so we took the time, I'm saying we, Gert, who I think is joining online, Gert, our lead accessibility engineer, took the time to actually go to the squads directly, understand what their definition of done looks like, what are the checks that they're making, and how can we slot in those like manual accessibility checks. We just want them to check, does it work on a screen reader? Does it work with keyboard? Does it work when you magnify it? Physically check that, please. But talking to them, looking at their actual document, let's slot it in. And we did that first with 4 squads who had really strong champions in it. So they were the ones we went to first. They were delighted to do this. They were really happy to take her on board. They did it, and then they helped us go to the next 4 because they'd already done it. So it was it maybe seems that it's time consuming to do it that way, but actually in the long run, rather than coming in with this one big new process and dumping it on teams that are like, well, what do you want me to do with that? Just taking the time to understand people, how they work, And doing it gradually in the long run, I think, makes it faster.
Oh, absolutely. It's that sort of seek to understand before being understood.
Yeah.
You can tailor your messaging, and actually I bet you were able to sort of encourage more consistency, possibly.
Yes, maybe a little. Yes.
Baby steps.
Maybe.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you, Heather. Becks, last but not least. Hello, welcome. Hi. So there's a quote that says, culture eats strategy for breakfast, and people may or may not agree with that one, but I do think organisational culture has quite a role to play when you're building a strategy. So tell us about how you built your strategy and the role of culture and culture and engagement and so on.
Definitely. So hi, I'm Becks. I lead digital accessibility across NatWest, and it's a role I got to create. Fantastic. So culture's the first thing I think about, and it's because it can absolutely derail you. It can completely allow you to think, I've got the best strategy, I've got the best process, I've got the best idea. And then you go in and you speak to the team and they've done something completely different because you didn't understand them, you weren't talking to them, you didn't understand where they were at, you didn't get their goals right. So for me, it's always something to be thinking about. And it will vary from company to company. And those of you that are in bigger companies, you will find that it varies from department to department and even team to team. And that can be that autonomous thing where you've got one team that's super autonomous and their culture is like, no, I'm going to do this my way. And you can have your great process and they think, okay, now I've got a better way of doing that. So you've got to think about in your strategy, what are you going to lean into here? And we've talked a lot about being adaptable. And that idea of when you go in, you're kind of assessing where are these people at, right? What do they understand disability? Let's start there. Have they heard about accessibility? Have they had the conformance conversation? Are we talking apples for apples? And you're kind of working out where they're at in that journey. So for me, there is this kind of adaptability that you need in your strategy and in your tactics so that you can have that ability to lean in and have a nice warm hug with some people. I'm a big fan of Olaf, obviously on Zoom. And yes, so a nice warm hug if you don't understand it, it's feeling really tough. Let's have a hug. Or you might be in a completely different position and maybe Olaf is not appropriate. So the thing for me, though, is this links to the next session coming on burnout, right? If you haven't considered your culture, you may need to change it, right? We are talking about moving culture, but you need to think about how much energy you're going to expend in moving a position. And actually, will a different tactic be better spent at that point? So let me put this into context. For me right now, accessibility is quite easy. As a bank, we talk about having people, families, businesses to thrive. That's the purpose. It's really easy to align an accessible bank by design straight in underneath that. And that then sits into every exec, every senior manager, every manager. I can start my conversation there. So that's easy. There are then harder things after that. So you kind of think, what's easy for me, what's hard for me, and where am I going to place my rocks that the water's going to flow down the hill? And, water's going to flow down the hill the way it wants to go down it. So how much energy are you going to expend? So for me, it's that people thing. And all of the stuff everyone said is absolutely true and, great things to think about. And I was absolutely smiling at every single one of them because we've all been there. But, if you can understand the human condition, the people you're talking to, and really understand that kind of empathy for them coming into this position. And I think you just said, we're the ones that care most about accessibility. When you walk into that room, so what do they care about? Your strategy's there. Don't let culture eat your strategy. Understand it and use it to benefit. That's kind of my always sort of thinking about.
It's really, because it's interesting how you can actually grab culture and, as you say, use it as your friend, you know, but sometimes it's tempting to dive into solving the symptoms rather than the cause as well of a cultural sort of hurdle. And
if it's not your friend, understand that. If it's not having the position that you want, if somebody is actively, or if you've got a whole area, it's probably not one person, it's kind of a behavioural thing that's going on, an environmental thing. It's the system that's not allowing people to make really good decisions. So you understand that and then decide, I'm going to go after that. And I'm going to expend a load of energy to go and adjust that system, that environment. Going back to change management culture, right? Think of it in that way and how you can kind of adjust the water as it comes down the hill. It is worth it, but know you're going into it.
Most definitely. No, I think that's really interesting. And actually, you know, AbilityNet having the privilege of working with loads of different organisations on their strategies, listening to where they're at and trying to get a proper temperature check of the culture before providing any sort of steer and advice is absolutely key, because it's not just about benchmarking where people are, but it's why they're there and what's holding them there and what could really accelerate it. So.
And then there's the kind of decisions you get, right? So you've got a decision of, you know, do I go for A, which is really easy, and that might not have such a big impact, but actually we might need a quick win to put on the board to talk about, to celebrate, or maybe it's, you know, lever B we want to pull, and that's going to take me a bit longer, but we know that will have a wider impact. But for me, they're the decisions that you can take. So we've talked about capability process, you know, exec sponsorship, all of those things. You can then make the decision, which one am I going to go after, and how do I prioritise that?
Fantastic. Well, I am going to be getting my gold star for timekeeping from Mark. So 30 seconds to go. But I mean, I really hope that has been loads of good, actionable advice from a fantastic panel on how to get your plan together for 2025. You know, I think it's going to be a big and exciting year in accessibility. So set your goals high and go for it. You know, you can do it. Isn't it?
You can, and if not, have a warm hug.
Olaf is always here to console you.
I'm always for a battle.
Well, thank you, everyone. I'm excited to introduce the next panel. My wonderful colleague, Lucy Woodcock, is going to be talking to Teach Access. So I will vacate the stage with my wonderful friends and let that happen. Thank you.